can only be attributable to human error.
You're entering Paranormal.
He meddled in things that you people. He meddled in things. He meddled in things.
Where will we go next? This phantom from another time.
No one, Mr. Muller.
That's it, man. Game over, man. Game over.
That is one big pile of shit.
Hello, I'm Daikaiju.
I'm Jasmine with
I'm Eli Watson.
And we are
Cryptid
Campfire.
Woohoo!
Hey guys, today we're talking about plesiosaurs.
Oh yeah.
You know what? In a sense, we are. We are. So, for those of you who are just joining us for the first time, whether you're listening to us on your favorite podcast platform or watching us here on the Paranormal YouTube channel, the Paranormal Network, you may or may not know that we started our podcast back in 2018. We've been doing this for about 3 years now. And back on October 24th of 2018, Cryptid Campfire released its very first episode ever, titled Battle of the Lake Monsters. And in that 33-minute episode that we very briefly covered 3 different lake monsters in, we gave Nessie a good old 15 minutes of airtime. So because we didn't do any of those lake monsters justice, over time, we have revisited both Champ and Ogopogo in their new individual episodes that you can go back and listen to. So now it's time to redeem Nessie. You know, we had our first episode, which we're gonna fix some things from that today. And we did Ogopogo already, we did Champ, and it's finally time to give the Loch Ness Monster her redemption. So because Nessie is such a big topic and can result in a lot of information overload, I personally limited my research for today to only correcting and expanding on things we brought up in that original episode, because we didn't go into a lot of detail at all the first time around. And honestly, some of the stuff we said was just straight up incorrect. So I wanted to try and remedy some of that. But we have some additional information as well. Eli and Alex both did additional research. In fact, because we left so much good stuff out the first time, this is actually just part 1 of a 2-episode special that we're doing for the Loch Ness Monster. Kind of like how bands do more than one night at the same venue when they're on tour. I mean, you know, Cryptid Campfire World Tour, Harry Styles is doing 3 nights at the Forum in LA, so we're doing 2 episodes at Loch Ness.
Well, if Harry Styles is doing 3, I guess we're doing 3.
Let's not plan for that, but it might end up being that if it has to be.
Hey everyone, I want to thank you all for watching Cryptid Campfire, and I ask that if you are enjoying the show, please subscribe to the channel right now. Like this video, click on the bell so you can be notified each time a new video goes up. And now, back to the show.
All right. Yeah. The third one will just be a repeat of episode 2.
So if you couldn't tell already from that little intro I just did, we're going to be talking about the Loch Ness Monster today. You guys seem so enthusiastic about it. I'm really glad that I left a gap there for you to react.
Well, actually, I only did research on plesiosaurs.
Because that's what someone told us to.
They're making fun of me because that's what happened in our first episode. Eli told me we were going to do an episode on plesiosaurs, and I didn't understand the assignment. I thought that meant that we were going to talk about dinosaurs, not lake monsters.
I know, that's so bad.
Well, you know that it opens up how we view plesiosaurs, because you think of Nessie, you think of the kind of classic image of a plesiosaur hanging out in a modern world, but very few correlation when you do research for plesiosaurs factors into anything for lake monsters.
Honestly, we're going to be joking a lot today about how terrible our first episode was, because for this episode, I think we all re-listened to that first episode, and as entertaining and hilarious as it is, it's also very embarrassing and very inaccurate. So
It's a comedy show, dude.
it
It's
is.
not-
We used to say don't listen to our first episodes. Like, we were really embarrassed about our, like, when we first started getting our footing and everything like that. I'd recommend you listen to it because it's freaking hilarious. Like,
Don't do it.
like, we don't know what we're
No.
talking about.
Ye-
We literally have no idea.
Well, it was 2018. It was a different time. Podcasts were popping up left and right. They were still fairly new to the common man. And we said, by Jove, we got to plant our mark in it. We got to get us a podcast. But no one told us how much hard work it was to actually have to do research once you press record. So
Oh,
It was-
so many things.
I
I mean, if you guys want a good idea about how that first episode went before you actually listen to it, let's put it this way. We were doing an episode about lake monsters. Jasmine did not do any research on lake monsters at all because she was too busy looking up facts about dinosaurs. We were talking about 3 different lake monsters, apparently: Nessie, Ogopogo, and Champ. And Alex didn't do any research on, what was it? I can't remember. Was it Ogopogo or Champ? It was Ogopogo that you didn't have any information on, I think.
Or no one had any information on Loch Ness besides me. So any inaccurate information about Loch Ness all comes down to me.
It does. I wrote a quote in my notes from when I listened to the episode. When we start to talk about Champ, Alex gives geographical information about, like, Lake Champlain, and then says, and I quote, Champ, well, actually, I don't have that much written down. Never mind. That's it.
talking about how hard it is to do research. I looked up all the geographical locations and forgot to research the monster himself.
Oh, man. So it's going to be a fun one today, guys.
Well, I'm glad you brought up geographical research because I think that's what we're gonna dip our feet into first. Get it? Because it's
Because it's
Yeah.
water.
water.
Monster.
Lake.
Yeah. So Loch Ness, Scotland. If you don't know what a loch is, it's a lake or sea inlet. It's Scottish Gaelic, Scots Irish term. So that was one of the things that I didn't know when we recorded our first episode. We were like, what's a loch? Did we look it up? No, we didn't. We just were like, oh.
Yeah, my explanation was it's an inlet. It lets into the sea, which isn't wrong, but it's
Yeah.
also not the most helpful.
Not at all. Just vague enough.
Loch Ness was formed approximately 10,000 years ago towards the end of the last ice age, when a giant glacier melted in the Great Glen, which is a valley, 788 feet at its deepest point, 23 miles long, and only 1 mile wide. Loch Ness has the largest volume of fresh water in Great Britain.
Yeah, I was reading that it contains more water than all the lakes in England and Wales combined.
Whoa.
Its deepest point is 755 feet,
Which is contradictory to what I just said, which is that its deepest point is 788 feet. So who really knows?
that's
I guess?
it's contested because they say that's a sonar anomaly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So the deepest, I guess, known point is 755 feet.
Okay.
Feet, not
Peace.
I got that is the second largest Scottish loch by surface area after Loch Lomond, but is the largest by volume.
Mhm.
Do you know what the name Ness means?
No.
It means in the Old Celtic, roaring one.
Oh.
And the loch is actually named after the river Ness,
Mhm.
not the other way around. In case-
Interesting.
Yes.
Speaking of rivers, there's about 40 small rivers, streams, burns, and waterways that run into Loch Ness. And the loch is connected to the North Sea via the River Ness, and the Caledonian Canal, which both feed into the Moray Firth, where you can find bottlenose dolphins close to the shore on the incoming tide.
Sick. So the loch itself has 9 villages surrounding it, including a castle that's called Urquhart Castle. But I kept saying it for years as Urquhart. So if I mispronounce it, please forgive. I also got this. I didn't know this, but the river Ness and Loch Ness, they flow from the southwest to the northeast. So it flows south to north, which isn't that like contradictory to like most rivers?
I wouldn't know. I mean, when you look at a map and you hold it up like this, you would think gravity makes it flow from north to south. But who knows? I mean, the Earth's not flat. Oh, hot take. The Earth is not
easy,
flat.
Jasmine. Easy there.
So who knows?
Well, I guess, sorry, everyone. We're going to have to wait till next week to discuss Loch Ness because we're going to discuss flat Earth now.
Actually, we'll put a pin in part 1. Go ahead and write us in and tell us, I don't know, do rivers go south to north? Is that a thing?
I can find out, actually. Let me just look it up real quick.
Because I know the Nile goes that way as well.
And the Nile has all kinds of crazy supernatural stories attributed to it.
Yeah.
According to my Google search, which is, it's just a Google search, rivers flow in one direction all over the world, and that direction is downhill. So across the central and eastern United States, it's rare for rivers to flow north because the slope of the land is towards the south and the east. I've got something here that says Johns River and the Nile River are the only 2 rivers in the world that flow north.
But that's not true.
This says rivers always flow downhill.
I mean, well, that could be true.
I guess, we've said it before and we'll say it again. Geography is not our strong suit. And, I've gone my whole life. I know what a river is. I've been to rivers. I've swam in rivers. But if you ask me to explain what a river is, I'll tell you, I have no idea.
Well, talking about the loch a little bit more and moving away from which direction it flows, let's talk about some of the things that are carried by the flow. So some of the known species, because I did this for Champ and I think I did this for Ogopogo, so I feel like, consistency is key, So some of the fish that live, well, they're not all fish, but some of the species that live in the loch are the northern pike, the European eel, the European sea sturgeon, which I feel like comes up with almost every lake we talk about. There's sturgeon, the 3-spined stickleback, brook. Yeah, I don't know what that is. I wanted to look that up. The brook lamprey, Eurasian minnow, Atlantic salmon, sea trout, brown trout, and Arctic char.
Whoa.
So no plesiosaurs.
No.
Possible Morazosaurus, right?
No. Don't you know, guys? Nessie's not real.
Wow. I doubt it. We'll talk about it later, but I'm pretty sure she's the 13th Lord of Hell.
Well, speaking of this monster, what does the monster look like?
Well, often described as a large, long-necked plesiosaur type creature, sometimes with 1 to 2 humps protruding from the water. Sometimes it's said to have little tiny horns on its head, or little ear-like protrusions. But I mean, you can't beat Nessie, a plesiosaur-esque cryptid.
Yeah, it's a pretty general description. I mean, I've never met anybody who didn't know what the Loch Ness monster supposedly looked like to begin with. We've talked about plesiosaurs so much already, but for those of you who might not know, a plesiosaur was just a marine reptile from the Jurassic and Cretaceous periods that had a small head, a long neck, and 4 paddle-like limbs and a short tail. It went extinct about 65.5 million years ago with all the other dinosaurs.
Or did it?
That's what we're here to find out, isn't it? there's folklore. Nessie is one of those things where you can't really find where it started. Like for me, I feel like the legend of Nessie just has always been. And we're going to kind of talk about the debate about when Nessie, quote, came into existence and like where she came from and stuff like that. But in Scottish folklore, large animals and mythical creatures have been associated with many bodies of water, from small streams to large lakes and everything like that. These water horses or water kelpies are said to have magical powers and sometimes malevolent intentions. According to one version of the legend, the water horse lures small children into the water by offering them rides on its back. And then once the children are aboard, their hands become stuck to the beast and they're dragged to a watery death, only to have their livers wash ashore the following day.
Nice.
Don't know why it's just the liver.
That was a new little add-on to the myth, because we talked about kelpies before a couple years ago, and I remember it looks like they're trapped sometimes in water, and you go to touch them and you get dragged down. But now your liver is washing ashore. Like,
Well, isn't because the liver, isn't that what processes all your blood? It cleans the blood? Or am I
Maybe.
thinking of a different organ?
is that the
Because
You'd
like
think
when
I'd
you-
know, since I had a surgery on my organs recently with my appendix fig removed.
well there's
Well,
another example of, well, you had the surgery, but if someone asks you how the body works, that's a good question.
Yeah, all the
'cause-
blood leaving the stomach and intestines passes through the liver.
Yeah, so maybe, not that I'm trying to make sense out of a legend, but I think in some cultures the liver's considered unclean because it's essentially a filter for your blood.
Okay.
And so it's just kind of, it collects all the junk that gets into your blood, you know. They're like, this is trash.
They're like, hey man, we smoke cigarettes, but we don't eat the filters.
That's funny. But there is some, like, you could call it evidence, I guess, of a mysterious aquatic beast, something or other, in local stone carvings by the Pict people. We talked briefly about them in our first episode. The Pict were one of an ancient people who lived in what is now eastern and northeastern Scotland, and their name may refer to their custom of body painting or possibly tattooing. So when the Romans first came to northern Scotland in the 1st century AD, they found the highlands occupied by these people, the Picts, and from the carved standing stones that can still be found in the region around Loch Ness, it was clear that the Picts were fascinated by animals and careful to render them with great fidelity. And all of the animals depicted on these stones are lifelike and easily recognizable, all except for one. The exception being what looks like a strange beast with an elongated beak or muzzle and flippers instead of feet. It's described by some scholars as a swimming elephant. And it's the, like I said, earliest known evidence of a mysterious aquatic animal in the loch.
You know what's interesting is I came across the little stone carving that they present as, oh, this is one that we don't quite know. And to me, it looks like a heffalump from Winnie the Pooh.
Oh, really?
It looks like it's got, if you took an elephant and just kind of squashed it down and made its face a little smoother, and then with the weird flipper feet, it looks just like a heffalump and or woozle.
All
Cute.
these nonsense words.
Yeah. Heffalumps, woozles, Picts, Romans, made up languages.
Dude, I'm just telling you, man, live in a simple world. Everything before the 1800s is made up by the people in the 1800s. The earth is flat. You know why they call them the founding fathers, right?
No.
Because they found this stuff, bro.
Mm.
They found it all. Okay, anyways.
They called them the founding fathers because they like found it out, daddy-o.
Just tell me more about these Picts.
They used to dye themselves blue.
Did they really?
Mm-hmm. that because you were mentioning they look like they were tattooing.
Yeah.
They actually from what I can say, it's pronounced M-O, or it's spelled M-O-A-D, mode. I think it's some kind of plant or something that they would wash themselves with, and it would dye their skin blue, and then they would grow their hair out and let it get all crazy and mad. So just when the Romans came to Scotland, they're like, oh, there's like these crazy blue people running around, and they would yell and scream and sometimes beat themselves with their own weapons to get worked up in a battle frenzy.
What?
Yeah, because I had heard of the Picts back in the day, but I'd never really quite put it together until doing a little bit of this research. And yeah, they you mentioned, Jasmine, I think they descended from like Iron Age tribes.
I did not mention that. I just said that they were one of an ancient people who lived in what's now eastern and northeastern Scotland.
Ancient all the way back to the Iron Age.
Wow.
Not the Bronze Age?
No. Strangely enough, nobody has any records of the Bronze Age. It's almost like human history got set back.
Oh God.
Well, that's interesting. Is that all there is on those people? And what do they have to do with Loch Ness?
I mean, well, you go to Scotland and they say, oh, there's blue people running around, and they got monsters in the lakes too.
And the rivers.
Yeah, maybe we should just avoid this place altogether. It's kind of scary. And they eat sheep's kidneys too. That's what haggis is.
So besides the stone carvings that I mentioned that are made by the Picts that depict a mysterious aquatic animal with flippers and a long neck, the first written account of a mysterious creature like this appears in Saint Adamnan's book, The Life of Saint Columba, which is a biography of Saint Columba from 565 AD. And Columba is credited with introducing Christianity to Scotland. And in our original episode, we incorrectly called him Saint Columbia. So
Dude, I remember. Yeah, Saint Columbia. I remember now. I didn't know where you were going there for a minute, but Saint Columbia brings it all back.
Don't know where that I comes from in our first episode. It's Saint Columba. But according to Adamnan's account, believed to have been written in the 7th century, the Irish monk saw a water beast in the River Ness while on his way to visit a Pictish king. If you guys would like, I can read to you what I understand to be the original text translated. It comes from Saint Adamnan's book, The Life of Saint Columba, Book 2, Chapter 28, titled How an Aquatic Monster Was Driven Off by Virtue of the Blessed Man's Prayer.
Dang.
Would
Book
you like to hear
2,
it?
Chapter 28.
Yeah.
Dang.
Yeah.
That's thick. All right. Yeah, tell me.
It's not actually that long. It's a paragraph, but it's a little bit of a lengthy paragraph, but I'm going to read it to you. So it says, on another occasion also, when the blessed man being Saint Columba, the blessed man was living for some days in the province of the Picts. He was obliged to cross the River Ness, and when he reached the bank of the river, he saw some of the inhabitants burying an unfortunate man who, according to the account of those who were burying him, was a short time before seized as he was swimming and bitten most severely by a monster that lived in the water. His wretched body was, though too late, taken out with a hook by those who came to his assistance in a boat. The blessed man, on hearing this, was so far from being dismayed that he directed one of his companions to swim over and row across the cobble that was moored at the farther bank. And one of his men, whose name I'm unfortunately not even going to try to pronounce, hearing the command of the excellent man, obeyed without the least delay, taking off all his clothes except for his tunic and leaping into the water. But the monster, which so far from being satiated was only roused for more prey, was lying at the bottom of the stream, and when it felt the water disturbed above by the man swimming, suddenly rushed out and, giving an awful roar, darted after him with its mouth wide open as the man swam in the middle of the stream. Then the blessed man, observing this, raised his holy hand, while all the rest, brethren as well as strangers, were stupefied with terror, and invoking the name of God, formed the saving sign of the cross in the air, and commanded the ferocious monster, saying, "Thou shalt go no further, nor touch the man. Go back with all speed." Then, at the voice of the saint, the monster was terrified and fled more quickly than if it had been pulled back with ropes, though it had just got so near to the man as he swam that there were not more than the length of a spear staff between the man and the beast. Then the brethren, seeing that the monster had gone back and that their comrade returned to them in the boat was safe and sound, were struck with admiration and gave glory to God in the blessed man. And even the barbarous heathens who were present were forced by the greatness of this miracle, which they themselves had seen, to magnify the God of the Christians. So it was seen as a miracle, and it was a means for conversion. You know, these picked people saw this miracle happen and were suddenly like, "Oh, we're Christians now." And so what I just read to you, I do understand to be the original text translated, but according to the National Catholic Register, which calls itself America's most complete and faithful Catholic news source, adds the detail that the original man who had been killed was also brought back to life, and this was seen as another miracle by God. It says that when Columba got the gist of the story from the assembled mourners, he had laid his staff across the dead man's chest, and miraculously, the man stood up, alive and ready to go. So after that, and then after the banishment of the beast, you know, they gave glory to God, and the Picts were converted on the spot, even being baptized in the waters of the River Ness. And the thing is, even NCR, the National Catholic Register, it does make note that Saint Adamnan's account was written over 100 years after the alleged events even occurred. So how true are they? We don't know. But I find it interesting that they make the claim that the first man was brought back to life when I just read the original text and there's no mention of that. So I don't know where that comes from.
And no comment yet, because they said his wretched body was pulled out with a hook.
Yeah.
So it's just like, I'm back, I'm alive, and half my torso is missing. Oh my God.
Right?
Yeah. Well, may I share a couple other things that I read about Saint Columba?
Of course.
Some things that he is also accredited with outside of his monster slaying. Well, I guess he didn't slay it, but so Saint Columba, as mentioned, was a missionary and an abbot. He was also a scholar, a statesman, a diplomat, an author, and a poet. He is also credited with prophesying like all the time, curing the sick, disabled, and the lame. He turned water into wine, produced water from a rock, calmed storms at sea, produced fishermen with bounteous catches of fish, exorcised demons, multiplied a herd of cattle, conversed liberally with angels, and subdued savage beasts. No, I'm not talking about Jesus. I'm talking about Saint Columbia.
Columba.
Yeah.
It's just like, whew, what did this guy do?
Yeah,
A lot
right.
of parallels.
Quite a few parallels, I would
he
say.
he also did Sudoku in his free time as well.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah. So
you know what's interesting is because I remember I had never heard of Saint Columba before we did our first episode, and then I learned all about Saint Columbia. So it's nice to go back and learn about Saint Columba. But what's interesting is the guy Adamnan.
yeah.
Adamnan of Iowa, because did you guys mention he was a supposed relative of Columba as well?
oh, really?
They say that I think his dad's side was related actually to Columba. And from what I found, I don't know how true this is, but it claimed that he wrote the life of Saint Columba between 1697 and 700. But he was born in 625 or 624 and he died at 704. So he was like 75 when he started writing the book. Which could also factor into some of the craziness of the story.
to add on to that point, I mean, we did discuss Fred Beck's book, going back to the Ape Canyon episode.
Mhm.
And, he wrote about his encounter 40 years after the fact. And there was all sorts of wild spiritual stuff happening with the Sasquatch in that one. So who knows? Maybe they did see something and then just this sprung out of it.
It got exaggerated.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, Alex, there was something else that you mentioned before we started recording too, right?
Yeah. So we're talking about Saint Columba and his encounter with this supposed monster. And what's interesting is in my research I found this guy Chris Kearney. He's come forward and he believes that the story is a mistranslation kind of carryover of Saint Patrick encountering a sea monster or a lake monster. And so we talk about Saint Columba. He's kind of known as the guy who Christianized Scotland, and Saint Patrick is the patron saint of Ireland. He's the guy who they credit as bringing Christianity to Ireland. He's also you talked about Columba has all these crazy like miracles attributed to him. Patrick does as well. One of the most famous being he drove all the snakes out of Ireland with the power of God.
We discussed that, didn't we? On the show before, I thought.
St. Patrick's Day we covered with leprechauns.
That would make
Yeah, that's
sense.
But what's interesting is, so St. Columba was born in 521 and he died in 597. St. Patrick was born in 385 and he died in 461. So there's enough gap to where maybe just, kind of carry over. But the story is in Irish folklore, there's these things called Oli Fiest. And Olafest in Irish is great. And Piest translates to worm, monster, reptile, or fabulous beast, if you're feeling a little fancy. And they're basically like sea serpent monsters all over Ireland. And these monsters were believed to inhabit many lakes and rivers in Ireland, and were many legends of saints and heroes fighting them. In one story, the Oliafest cuts the root of the River Shannon when it hears that St. Patrick has come to drive out it and its kind. In a comic addition to the story, the monster swallows a drunken piper named O'Rourke. The piper is either unaware of his predicament or he's so completely unperturbed and so drunk that he continues to play his instruments inside the monster's stomach.
What?
Love that.
The monster becomes so annoyed with O'Rourke's music that he ends up coughing him up and spitting him out.
Nice.
That's like the story that like when I was younger, my mom would always say, man, if someone were to ever kidnap you, they'd just bring you back because you talk too much. They're like, a sea monster eats you, but you play music too loud and too annoying that it just spits you back out.
Yeah, right. Or it makes me think of Jurassic Park 3, to where the Spinosaurus, getting back to dinosaurs, he eats the guy holding the phone, so they keep hearing the ringtone throughout the jungle as it's getting closer.
Do 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 do.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, that's the one.
But so it's interesting how St. Patrick, two stories of two guys going to different lands, encountering different monsters.
Mm-hmm.
And there was one other part I wanted to throw in too, which was, so other stories of the Olafest exist throughout Irish folklore as well. One that's pretty funny before I lead to the final part. One has the girl named Sionin. She's the granddaughter of this guy called Meanian Mac Lear, which is like a kind of old-timey deity from ancient Ireland. But apparently there's this thing called the Salmon of Knowledge, which is a fish that through somehow along the way it ate 9 walnuts of 9 trees of life, and it's accumulated all the knowledge in the world. And if you can find this fish and eat it, you get all the knowledge it had.
Whoa.
Well, I just had a salmon poke bowl for dinner last night, so I wonder if I got that right fish.
They say fish is brain food, but apparently she was throwing rocks at the Salmon of Knowledge for some reason, and it got distressed. So an Olafest showed up and killed her in retribution.
Oh.
So leave salmon alone.
Or
But here,
Nessie will eat you.
yeah, right. So here's the kind of craziest thing that I found. This is really interesting because we talked about how Saint Columba, he was traveling with the Picts. He saw this monster. He said, "Hey, monster, get out of here!" Like, get out of here, you big monster. Leave him alone. Well, in Irish folklore, there's this creature called the Caoranach, also known as Cole, which is said to be one of the main Olafest in Irish folklore. It's also said to be the mother of all demons. And they say this is what St. Patrick encountered. In one version, St. Patrick arrives to the area and is told about the monster's existence. So he goes to where he finds the monster and he starts to argue with the beast before the argument, is going nowhere. So he takes out a sword and he slays the monster. And they say that the blood dyed the river red.
Oh my God.
Nice.
Imagine that's how we solved our conflicts, guys. We have problems. We need to talk out and we're not getting anywhere. So we just pull out a weapon and just.
This
Just like-
conversation's going nowhere.
pull out a big battle axe. Boring
Mhm.
conversation anyway.
Mhm.
But so that just kind of interesting to in episode 1 we looked into Saint Columba, and
Well, Eli did
Eli looked into and kind of told us about him
a little bit.
gave me an idea, and so today's episode I want to look into it, and I fell down a rabbit hole of just downright plagiarism. They just keep taking the same story and changing a few bits and
Yeah.
taking out the violence a little bit. That's what I'm concerned.
That's interesting, though. So, if you're listening to this podcast and you're like, I don't understand, when is Loch Ness going to show up?
Well, we'll save that for part 2. Thanks, everybody. Good night.
I mean, just keep waiting. So yeah, that's kind of like the folklore. It's contested, really, whether or not St. Columba's encounter actually happened or not. And in fact, during the first episode, I think I credit this to Ronald Binns when I say that sightings prior to 1933 are dubious at best. And when I was researching for this episode, it's not just Ronald Binns who thinks that. It's like a whole bunch of Nessie researchers really think anything prior to 1933 is like, not that it's not real, but it's just there's nothing concrete in it. And that is understandable, but I think there's a lot of inferences you can make. And I will be sharing some of these stories here. So I have one here from 1725. This one comes from a book called The Loch Ness Monster by Bradley Steffens. It's like a 50-page book. I told our good friend Carrick that we would be doing a Loch Ness Monster episode, and we were talking about the very thing I just discussed, the 1933, anything before that. And he was like, oh, I think there's one that I have from a book. So he took a picture of the page and sent it to me. And basically, it's a very short encounter, and it describes a group or a squadron of British soldiers who arrived at Loch Ness in 1725 to build a road along the south shore. They all hear noises coming from the water, and when they look up and to see what's going on, they see 2 creatures as big as whales swimming in the loch, and that's where it ends. So I mean, it's not impossible for whales to appear in the loch. Like we did say in the beginning, it does open out into the sea. How they would breathe in the loch is something. Well, actually, they're mammals, so they breathe air. Never mind. It's the loch is a freshwater, and obviously the sea is not fresh. So like fish, there's like that boundary, between freshwater and saltwater.
I don't know anything about whales. But one of the things I neglected to mention about the loch specifically is that the average water temperature throughout the year is about 5.5 degrees Celsius, which is 42 degrees Fahrenheit. And the waters of Loch Ness never freeze over. So that'll come into play maybe a little bit later when we start talking about, well, if there is something in the loch, what is it and why it can't be certain things, because certain animals can't really flourish in temperatures that are that low and things like that.
Nice. A crispy 42 degrees.
Woohoo!
Yeah,
A little
it's
bit
a little
chilly
hot.
outside. Yeah.
Well, we're going to discuss at some point, spoiler alert, we're going to discuss Aleister Crowley. He is a famous occultist and wizard, warlock kind of dude. But before we get to him, we're going to discuss another warlock, because Crowley was not the first one to call the loch home. There was someone else.
Okay.
And this story takes place in 1833. Actually, the story does not take place in 1833. It is reported in 1833, which is a full 100 years before the first commonly accepted Loch Ness monster sighting, right?
Mhm.
So in 1833, a man named Gregor Wilkes McGregor, aka Wilkes the Warlock, died, and the Inverness Courier, which I'm sure will be coming up a lot later, devoted a page to his obituary. Here's some quotes for you. Gregor was the last of a line of ancestors, long the object of awe and veneration as the possessors of the only means ever known of prying into futurity, and of controlling and circumventing the works of both natural and supernatural agents. Basically, as the story goes, he is kind of credited in the paper itself as being one of the only people to have battled the monster of Loch Ness.
Whoa.
So as the story goes, and I kind of quote for quote, I'm going to read half the story, and then the other half is kind of paraphrased because it goes on for a long time. So to conserve time, I split it up. So as the quote goes, Wilkes was walking along a wild and solitary pass on the road between Strathspey and Inverness. The darkness hung all around him. The deadly Kelpie loomed into view in the guise of an inviting horse. According to the old tale, the Kelpie in question sported a piece of yellow metal that resembled the bit of a horse's bridle, as a means to try and further emphasize its deceptive horse-themed imagery. The supernatural thing was apparently confident that Wilkes would mount the horse, thus forever sealing his fate when it dragged him screaming for his life beneath the waters of Loch Ness.
Oh,
Not so. Astutely realizing that he was not in the presence of a friendly horse on a late night wander around the shores of Loch Ness, but instead a murderous lake monster in disguise, Wilkes wasted no time in whipping out his claymore, an old-time two-handed longsword. He brought it down hard and fast on the Kelpie's nose, which badly damaged the creature's jaw and brought it to its knees. The bridle was sliced in two pieces, and Wilkes quickly grabbed the aforementioned piece of yellow metal. It was at that point, incredibly, that the Kelpie did something very strange.
okay.
Instead of launching an attack on Wilkes, it spoke to him. So the Kelpie tells him, well, do you have a question?
No, I just wasn't expecting that.
Yeah.
The story has lots of twists and turns.
That's one of my favorites that I came across is what happens next.
Oh, you found what happens next?
Yeah, but not not you found the actual text. So I just got like the bare bones of like, oh, and this happened. So I'm like, oh, this is even way more exciting.
Dude, yeah. So the Kelpie tells him that if he returns the bridle to him, it would simply leave and be on its way. And, forgive and let live,
No harm done.
But Wilkes did not trust it. So he demands to know the secrets of the Kelpie's paranormal powers. So the Kelpie agrees and tells him that if he looks through the holes in the bit, it would be possible for him to encounter other supernatural entities around the loch. It would also give Willix the power of the second sight. So Willix said, "Thanks, I'm going to keep this."
So good.
And the monster is confused because the monster believed that if it had told him the power of the bridle, he would just be scared and give it back. Instead of being like, "Thanks, this sounds awesome."
This is the best thing I have.
So it demands it back. I'm imagining it's yelling at him, and Willix just runs away to his house. He gets to his house.
With
So
his giant black coat flowing behind him.
Probably. The monster's chasing him. He gets to his house. Does he enter the house? No. He instead tosses the bridle in through the window into his wife's lap. The monster cannot enter the house because of the cross on the door. And so Willix takes his sword, swings it at the creature, and basically gets it to just back away. And that's the story, really.
It's so good.
So to me, that doesn't sound like he battled the monster. That sounds like he scared it off. Battle makes me think there was like actual contact. And I mean, I guess there was a scuffle at the beginning when he started to get dragged down. But this doesn't sound like a battle to me. This sounds like an escape.
It's a battle in the sense of he hit it with his sword and it kind of disarmed it, or kind of disarmed it, but it didn't kill it. Like I don't think you could kill this thing with its sword. So the next thing is at least take a piece of its armor and try to use it against it.
Yeah.
You pull the old one too of like, because one of the sentences for describing that I found, it said McGregor got to his home and the Kelpie asserted that McGregor would never be able to enter his house because he had the cross over the door. So the monster thinks he's beating him, and he's like, "Oh, what's this?" And throws it through the window.
Throws it through the window.
It's so good. And then after he kind of like Eli said, he kind of hit it with its sword to make it go away. It says it accepted its fate and left, cursing and swearing the whole way through.
Wow.
Dude, what a wild story. And so obviously, without a doubt, there's debate on whether or not that actually happened. But the takeaway is the knowledge of Kelpies existing in the loch, right? Which is a reoccurring theme, as I'll tell in this next story, which is not nearly as wild. But October 1868, a large fish creature washes ashore of the loch, and there's a huge crowd that forms. People are looking at it. What is this thing? Come to find out, not too long after it's discovered, it's positively identified as a 6-foot bottle-nosed whale, which a crew of fishermen had removed its blubber and then dumped it on the shore for shock value.
Interesting.
And there's a couple of takeaways here. And again, this is reported by the Inverness Courier. And I want to read this quote for sure. And it says, oh, it's not a quote from the paper. So what I'm about to read is a quote from a book, Nick Redfern's book, Nessie, The Supernatural Origins of the Loch Ness Monster. The unnamed reporter who covered the story said that the finding of the animal reminded local folk of a large fish of a similar appearance that had been encountered on many occasions and for many years in Loch Ness. You also have the fact that there are Kelpie stories for several lochs around Loch Ness, but the fishermen deliberately chose to put it in Loch Ness. Why? Why Loch Ness of all the other lochs?
So would you say that this is what year did this happen again? 1800 something?
1868.
So would we say that this was the first deliberate Loch Ness hoax?
It could have been.
Or who knows, maybe because it was deliberately dumped there by the fishermen, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because we talked about, because one thing looking into all the research is Scotland's just full of lochs and they got monsters in them.
Yeah.
So maybe the fishermen were like, hey, Loch Ness, as far as I can tell, this one doesn't have any monsters because all the other surrounding lochs are full of them. Let's dump the body here. It should be okay. And then they brought something to the surface.
Yeah. Yeah, and you have to think too, with the blubber removed and it's all deformed and gross looking,
Yeah. I mean, got the whole town out. Crowds of people. Hey, look at the weird thing on the beach. Who wants to poke it with a stick?
Yeah. Well, that is not the only piece of evidence we have referring to something that the locals knew was in the area, right? So in 1880, which is only 12 years after that occurrence, we have a report from a man named E.H. Bright. And so this is reported in a book called The Leviathans. And I'm not sure who it was written by, because again, I'm pulling this from a different book. This is from Nick Redfern's book, Nessie. So as the story goes, E.H. Bright was 8 years old at the time, and he was with a friend who was also 8 years old, and they're kind of just walking home, and they see a beast. It looms out of the dense woods. So this is a land encounter, and they're about 300 feet. Bright and his friend are about 300 feet away from this when it comes out. They described it as being elephant-like in both size and color, had a long neck, and a very small head that looked like a snake's head in terms of its shape. And it moved in a very strange fashion. It had an awkward waddle that suggested it was not accustomed to walking on land. And as it reached the water, because they watch it cross in front of them and into the water, it plunges in and then disappears from view in seconds. And so Bright and his friend go to Bright's grandfather's house and tell his grandfather what had happened. And his grandfather just kind of laughs at them. It's like, oh, maybe you guys were drinking whiskey or something.
Damn, damn 8-year-olds.
I know. And it's all fun and games until Bright and his friend take their grandfather to where it happened, and they're seeing 3-toed tracks from where this thing left the woods and into the water. And then his grandpa tells them that there's a history of a monster in the loch, but it's better to keep silent on it. And that's something, as I read Nick Redfern's book, kind of kept coming up, is that the locals knew about it for a long time, but it wasn't that they didn't think it was significant, but it was almost like it was a normal thing. Like there's this thing that lives in the loch, just like all the other animals, so if you see one, it's not necessarily important to report it.
Interesting that it had 3-toed prints, because the idea of it being a plesiosaur would be that it has flippers and it kind of waddles like that, but to have 3 distinct toe marks is interesting.
Yeah.
And just the whiplash of being 8 years old, seeing a monster, going to tell your grandpa, I just saw monsters. Crazy. You've been getting into the whiskey again, eh, boy? And you're like, no, really, I mean it, Gramps. Come on. And then you take him to the spot and you see the track. And he's like, oh, yeah, actually, there is a monster here. And it's been a legend since I was a little boy, too.
Yeah.
Grandpa, why are you busting my chops then?
It's true. It's true. Well, I think it's time to dip in to the big boy.
Talking about Bigfoot today. Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Well, we're going to be discussing Aleister Crowley. And the reason I want to discuss him here and now is because his story and what happens and his influence on the loch is like so intertwined. it keeps coming back. And so, we, like Jasmine said, perhaps we could bring this up during explanations, but it could be an explanation, which we'll definitely discuss in part 2, but it's more than just an explanation. There's more happening here,
There's a lot intertwined. So for anybody who might be listening for the first time, our episodes usually follow a certain format where at the end of our episodes, we talk about possible explanations of what cryptid sightings could be or what the creatures could be. Is it misidentifications? Is it some undiscovered species? Blah, 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 blah. But for this one, there's talks that it could be a supernatural creature or a demon summoned by someone like Aleister Crowley, who was an occultist, ceremonial magician, poet, painter, novelist, mountaineer, wore a lot of hats, not physical hats, but like.
Oh well, he had that crazy goofy hat that is the famous picture of. It's like a pyramid, and he's like.
Adding on to some of those hats, if I may, he was a hedonist, bisexual, drug addict, and astrologer.
Yeah.
And he made a cameo in Venture Brothers.
I don't know what that is.
I missed that.
When they're talking, Venture Brothers is a very good show on Adult Swim, which was canceled, but we're getting the movie sometime to close out the story. But there's a part where the characters, it takes place modern day, and they're trying to find this orb, this mystical orb that was created by different people throughout history. And then there's a flashback to where you see like Jules Verne has like an actual flying ship, and Aleister Crowley's on there, and a bunch of like people from turn of the century all hanging out, and they're talking about the orb.
Oh, wild.
And someone makes a joke about, because Aleister Crowley's like, I want to use it to take over the world for my mystical powers. And one guy's like, oh, should we throw the chubby wizard off? See if he can fly.
Oh, man. That's crazy.
He's also dubbed as the most wicked man in the world.
And he called himself the Beast 666.
Yep.
He was ahead of the Twitter handles before it was even invented.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sure that we'll throw in some more descriptive details, but I kind of have the bare bones about Aleister Crowley, so I'll just go ahead and share that, and then you guys can jump in with like the meat. So between 1899 and 1913, Crowley lived and performed rituals at a property overlooking Loch Ness, which is called the Boleskine House, which is not how we pronounced it in the first episode, but we checked it this time, and it's Boleskine. These rituals that he would do would sometimes require celibacy and abstinence, which, as we've just mentioned, were probably hard for this man to do. And there's like speculation that maybe it was too difficult for him, and he left the Boleskine house before completing the spells. So, the demons he summoned, he never returned, and whatever. And that's kind of the idea when it comes into like the explanation of what Nessie might be. But as a disclaimer, Crowley's quite the topic, but BoleskineHouse.org makes note that the magic of Abramelin, which is what he performed on the property, was not actually a black magic ceremony. And that's not to say that Crowley didn't do black magic, but this ritual specifically was instead a strict rite which originated out of a mid-15th century manuscript of Jewish provenance, outlining a rigorous set of practices involving devotion and prayer as a method to speak directly with God. But like I said, the story goes that he left behind the demons that he had conjured up, which also led to a series of tragedies on the property, including the deaths of his lodge keepers, 2 children. So there's lots of talk about the property being cursed. But there's also talk about locals claiming that he would throw sacrificial sheep into the loch every Sunday for his pet Nessie. So like, there's one idea that, he summoned Nessie from hell or whatever, but also it was his pet. And so, but Just some fun side facts. The property was later owned by musician Jimmy Page of Led Zeppelin. It was damaged by a fire in 2015. In 2019, the house was put on the market and it was purchased the following July. And the Boleskine House Foundation was established shortly after, with the land now being in the ownership of a charity. It's intended that the house will remain a charitable cause for years to come. But another fire did happen in July of 2019, which I think was supposedly arson. So if you're wanting to visit the Boleskine house, due to ongoing construction work on the site and the limited staffing of tour guides, it's currently closed until further notice. Plus, you throw in the whole pandemic COVID-19 situation. They're not really doing tours right now, but that's kind of like a quick summary, like the basic facts about why this property is related to Loch Ness and what Aleister Crowley has to do with it. So please, guys, give me your input on how much more intertwined it becomes.
So Crowley was a member of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. That's important because that'll come back up. He was also a 33rd degree Mason, which is like the highest I believe you can reach, and founder of the School of Thelema. And so Crowley was involved in dabbling in all of these kind of different occult things. And his goal with Loch Ness, and kind of Loch Ness was just where what his goals required met a physical location. Okay. So he wanted to perform the great operation of the sacred magic of Abramelin. How did you say it? Abramelin, the mage. Abramelin, the mage. And he needed very specific requirements to do this. And he lists these requirements in his 1922 book, The Confessions of Aleister Crowley.
Okay. And this is an autobiographical book that he wrote?
Yes.
Okay.
And he writes of the requirements that he needed to do these rituals, that there should be a door opening to the north from the room of which you make your oratory. Outside this door, you construct a terrace covered with fine river sand. This ends in a lodge where the spirits may congregate. It would appear the simplest thing in the world for a man with 40,000 pounds who is ready to spend every penny of it on the achievement of his purpose to find a suitable house in very few weeks. But a magical house is as hard to find as a magical book to publish. I scoured the county in vain, and that is until he found the Boleskine house. Am I saying that correct? Yeah. A little bit more history on the Boleskine house was that it was built in the late 1700s as a hunting lodge. It is currently located near the BB-52, which I believe is a highway, and a graveyard, which is what it was constructed next to. The graveyard was there for a while, and that graveyard had a reputation for being evil even before the house was constructed. And it is said that the house is connected to the graveyard via a tunnel.
Whoa.
Yeah.
I listen, it's all there. We got the crazy magic guy. We got the house next to a cursed cemetery, which may even have a tunnel underneath it. Like,
yeah. So he purchases the house. He waits till Easter Sunday to begin his 6-month-long construction of the terrace and the lodge. That is what was required of him. He invites a friend, a colleague named Charles Rocher, who is also a member of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, to join him. The goal was that Charles was going to stay there for months and just kind of kick it with Crowley. But he left after only 3 weeks because he claimed the presence of unseen evil forces had descended upon the house and were determined to make his life a living hell. And he was like, no, I'm out. And Crowley was like, okay. And Crowley, so like the stories are pretty wild. Crowley one day went for a walk. He went for a stroll. I'm assuming he did this fairly regularly. When he comes back home and he enters his personal study, there's a priest there waiting for him who looks freaked out and tells Crowley that the lodge keeper, Hugh Gillies, who is a lifelong teetotaler, teetotaler, I don't know how to say that, but basically that means he abstained from alcohol his entire life, had been drunk for several days now and had attempted to murder his own family. Another friend, I didn't get his name, also attempted to stay with Crowley shortly after that, but he too left with the same intention, right? Staying for a couple of months. But he left after 2 weeks, claiming that malevolent spirits lived in the house. And Crowley's kind of response to all this was like, well, I only do stuff in the room with the most light. I don't get that, but okay. And
Maybe it's something lost in translation.
he doesn't. I don't know. It seemed like he kind of hints at it later in his book, and I'll bring up that quote later, that there was like stuff going on that he saw and witnessed, but he was very tight-lipped about it. To add to what Jasmine was saying about the pet, about the Loch Ness Monster being a pet for him, he had a sign posted outside the house that read, "Beware the Ichthyosaurus," or the Ichthyosaurus, which is another prehistoric animal that died out in the Jurassic period, and funny enough, was mostly aquatic, but could travel on land.
I think they're the ones that they look kind of like a dolphin, but they have like really sharp teeth and they're like way blockier, so I could see like them kind of crawling around.
Yeah.
Although I thought when you first said the Ichthyosaurus, I was like, damn, that Crowley, what a jokester.
Well, he kind of strikes me as being an edgelord, to be honest.
Is this the fish lizard we're talking about?
Yeah, it's
looks like a evil dolphin.
Cool.
Yeah.
Oh, I mean, isn't the definition of an edgelord somebody who like hangs out in a weird house trying to do weird magic things? And Crowley did try to make a moonchild one time.
He did, with L. Ron Hubbard.
Yeah. That's like the textbook example of edgelord, right?
Yeah.
Trying to make the Antichrist.
Well, get this. So at some point while he's living at the house, he decides that it's too much for him and just like leaves.
Yeah.
And then meets his wife, who was Rose Edith Kelly. They went to Egypt for their honeymoon, where he was doing like some other ritual and she was like channeling old thoughts from different pharaohs and stuff. Like, so she was just in it with him, like doing all this wild stuff. And they returned to the house. They both lived in the house, the Bleskin house, in 1903 till 1911, when he had to have her committed to an asylum for uncontrollable alcoholism. And then Crowley himself left the house forever in 1913. And yeah, I don't know. There's like all sorts of crazy stuff that happened in that house. Like people have been murdered in that house. People have committed suicide in that house. Like
bad juju.
That many bad things happening in a single location is like pretty wild.
Yeah.
And add Crowley to it as well, and it's just a powder keg of.
Well,
we gotta wonder if Crowley was part of the cause.
Part of the cause, or just compounded the problem, like it sounds like it was already here. I'll read this quote here because this comes from an article he wrote in November of 1933 as a response to all the Loch Ness Monster sightings that were happening, which we're about to get into. But the article is called "The Magician of Loch Ness: Uncanny Happenings Uncanny Happenings of Manor of Bleskin." And he says, and he writes, long before I purchased the manor, it was already the place around which a score of legends had been woven, all of them of a mysterious nature. Thus the head of old Lord Lovat, who was beheaded after the 45 Jacobite rebellion, was believed to roll up and down the corridors of the rambling old place. There was another legend that a lunatic had murdered his mother by smashing her brains out against the wall, and that she returned at times to pick them up again. These alone had sufficed to give Bleskin an evil reputation, and my own experiences there by no means diminished that evil reputation. But then he doesn't get into it. But yeah, Jasmine kind of summed it up really nicely. Like, did he summon the Loch Ness monster? Was that part of the thing? My opinion is no, because it just seems like it was there before, you know, but there's just like a lot of weird stuff happening at Loch Ness.
Yeah.
You know, it's probably a good thing he didn't summon, just because just the fact that this guy seemed to be globetrotting around the world, half starting rituals before abandoning them and going somewhere else.
Right.
So it's a good thing he probably never finished what he set out to do.
Yeah.
And you know what else we're not going to get into?
Loch Ness.
Loch Ness monster. Just kidding. We kind of did.
We gave you a good appetizer of this possible 3-course buffet.
Yeah, so it turns out my joke about Harry Styles 3 nights at the Forum is actually going to be 3 nights at Loch Ness instead of just 2, because we
added
just
a third night. Woohoo!
just have so much. We added a 3rd night, guys. This is going to be a 3-parter. Loch Ness is going to be a glorious 3-part episode, which we should all be excited about. We shouldn't be disappointed about that, because again, our first episode about Loch Ness was 15 minutes. And now here we are. We're doing a 3-part episode. So
doing 3 15-minute episodes, guys.
No. But yeah, stick around, guys. We have so much more to share, and it's gonna be great. And thank you for listening and for watching.
I hope you enjoyed this extended look at the folklore of the Loch Ness monster.
Yeah.
This is like, you know, we do the folklore bit at the beginning of every episode, but that is just what this episode was.
Yeah. And I think the way that we're splitting it up right now is we have this episode that we just did. Next episode, we're going to kind of get into when Nessie really took the world by storm, like when things really picked up in 1933. We had a lot of stuff happening. And then the episode after that, we'll get into some more modern day, like current expeditions, scientific evidence, explanations, pop culture, that kind of stuff. We're still following the basic format of our podcast episodes. It's just being stretched out because there's so much to include.
We would like to introduce you to 2 types of podcast episodes. There's the regular kind that we've been doing for the whole tomes, and now the mega podcast episode.
Yeah.
3 times the size.
Yeah.
Literally 3 times. Well, thank you everyone for listening to the show, watching the show. Be sure to hit that subscribe button. Check us
like
out.
And comment too.
Yeah, like and comment. Tell us, you know, what you think. You know, ladies, I'm single. You know, joking. I'm joking.
You're gonna leave that in.
Oh, I'm gonna. Check out our website, cryptidcampfire.com. Get yourself a snazzy Cryptid Campfire t-shirt, which none of us are wearing currently.
I mean, we can't buy our own merch. That's the listener's job. Go out there and do your thing.
Check us out on Patreon. $5 a month gets you access to 2 exclusive episodes per month, as well as an exclusive wallpaper designed by our very own Alex Daikaiju. Considering we're talking about a certain topic for the majority of the month, you could probably guess what it is.
Yeah, I was thinking of doing a Don Cheadle wallpaper.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you want to see some of Alex's other artwork that can be converted into wallpapers, how can we do so?
Yes. Hello. I'm Alex Daikaiju. You can find me on Instagram at Alex Daikaiju. That's Alex Daikaiju. Post a lot of monster and cryptid related artwork. I also make my own comics for fun and profit. Be sure to check it out. And my sources today, I had to use the Dreadnought Wikipedia on these unstable seas of the internet. I used Nova.com. I used BustedHalo.com too. And then I didn't use anything from it, but I had to take a look at CryptidWikis.com.
Nice.
And I'm going to throw it over to Jasmine. I would like to say that she's the animal lover of the group. She loves dogs, cats, animals of all kind. So I have to tell this first. The other day, I unfortunately spilled spot remover on my dog, and now he's gone.
Get it? The spot?
Because the dog's name is Spot.
And now take it away, Jasmine.
Oh my gosh. Okay. If you guys want to follow me on social media, my name on Instagram and Twitter is Jasmine Maywith, JasmineMaewith. My sources today, I'm actually not going to read off the entire list because we are going to do this 3-part episode. I will give a big finale bibliography at the end of our last episode. But throughout today's episode, I think I mentioned a couple of the sources, on the National Catholic Register, the Beliskin website, things like that. But look forward to our final episode where I will list off all of the sites that I used and all the sources that you can look into for further information in detail.
Heck yeah. That's pretty exciting. I'm looking forward to that list. I got to know. And I'm going to, before we throw it over to Eli, I just wanted to say, I recently caught up with an old friend of mine. We hadn't talked in for a few years. His name was Juan Ramirez. And he's been going to therapy. And I guess it's been doing him a lot of good. Because at the end of the day, I guess it takes Juan to know Juan. And now,
what kind of a
the
segue
Eli
is-
Watson.
What kind of a segue is that? Wow.
I'm so tired.
Well, everyone, you can follow me at the Eli Watson on Instagram. If you want to know my sources for today, get ready for the staggering list. Wikipedia, which I used for a lot of the information for the geography of Loch Ness. I did not use anything from the Cryptids wiki, but I still wrote it down.
Hell yeah.
They just launched the Cryptids cinematic universe, Cryptids with a Z.
Mm-hmm.
Be on the lookout.
Never before has 5 minutes felt like 2 hours.
In a good way. I used Nick Redfern's Nessie, exploring the supernatural origins of the Loch Ness Monster, and The Loch Ness Monster by Bradley Steffens, as well as the NC Register.
Very nice.
And that, friends, brings us to a close for this week. Stay tuned for episode 2 and 3 of the Loch Ness trilogy.
We're doing 3 nights in Scotland, everybody. Woo! Cryptid Campfire World Tour. Let's go!
Badam Zinga!
This podcast is a part of Straight Up Strange Productions. Discover more shows like this one at straightupstrange.com.